The credit card was declined. A simple transaction at table 12, $847 for dinner and wine. But when Michael Torres saw the name on the rejected American Express black card, his hands started shaking. Vincent Carano, the man who destroyed his detective career 3 years ago, was sitting 20 feet away, completely unaware that his biggest enemy was about to serve him dessert. What happened next would prove that sometimes justice is served one course at a time. Detective Michael Torres had been the best financial crimes investigator in the NYPD's history. For 12 years, he'd taken down money launderers, Ponzi schemers, and white-collar criminals who thought they were untouchable. His clearance rate was legendary. 94% of cases solved, millions in stolen money recovered, dozens of sophisticated criminals behind bars. Then came the Meridian investment case. Meridian was a luxury real estate firm that had built elderly investors out of $50 million through fake property developments. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, shell companies, a paper trail that led directly to the company's CEO, Vincent Carano. But when Michael arrived to make the arrest, he found Carano's office empty and every piece of evidence gone. Someone had tipped him off. Worse, when Internal Affairs investigated the leak, they found $25,000 in cash hidden in Michael's apartment, planted there to make him look like the corrupt detective who'd sold out his own case. "You're finished, Torres," Carano had whispered during his brief arrest on lesser charges. "No one will ever believe a word you say again." The corruption charges were eventually dropped. There wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. But the damage was done. Michael's reputation was destroyed, his career over, his marriage a casualty of the stress and suspicion. He resigned from the force rather than face daily whispers and sideways glances from colleagues who'd never quite trust him again. 3 years later, Detective Michael Torres had become simply Michael, a waiter at Le Grand Chateau, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants where the city's wealthy and powerful came to see and be seen. Working at Le Grand Chateau wasn't exactly what Michael had imagined for his future, but it had advantages. The pay was decent, especially with tips from clients who thought nothing of spending more on wine than most people made in a month. The work was honest, straightforward, no life-or-death decisions, no corruption, no politics. Most importantly, he was invisible. Wealthy diners barely acknowledged waitstaff as human beings. They spoke freely around Michael as if he weren't there, discussing business deals, family secrets, and sometimes illegal activities with remarkable carelessness. It was a different kind of surveillance, one where the subjects had no idea they were being observed. Michael had trained himself not to listen, not to care. He wasn't a detective anymore. He was just a guy trying to earn a living and rebuild his life. But old habits die hard, and when you've spent 12 years reading people and spotting patterns, you can't simply turn that off. That's why he noticed the Russian businessman who paid for everything in cash. Why he remembered the pharmaceutical executive who always requested the same private dining room for meetings with FDA officials. Why he'd started keeping a mental file of the art dealer who met with known money launderers every Tuesday at table 7. He told himself it was just professional curiosity, that he wasn't really investigating anything, that he'd learned his lesson about being a hero. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. Vincent Carano hadn't changed much in 3 years. Still impeccably dressed, still radiating the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. He sat at table 12 with 2 associates, celebrating what appeared to be a successful business deal. Michael approached the table with practiced professionalism, even as his heart pounded. There was no recognition in Carano's eyes. To him, Michael was just another faceless servant. "The Chateau Margaux 2010, Carano announced loudly, clearly showing off for his companions. "Price is no object." Michael nodded and retreated to the wine cellar, his mind racing. Carano was here, in his restaurant, acting like he owned the world. The same man who'd destroyed his life, who'd stolen millions from elderly victims, who'd walked away clean while Michael lost everything. When he returned with the wine, Michael noticed something that made his detective instincts fire. The leather portfolio beside Carano's plate was filled with documents marked Pinnacle Development Corp., the same type of real estate investment scheme that Meridian had been running. Carano was still in business. As Michael poured the wine, he caught glimpses of the documents. Property listings for developments in Florida, investment prospectuses promising guaranteed returns, names and contact information for potential victims, all elderly, all wealthy, all perfect targets for another Meridian-style scam. "Excuse me," one of Carano's associates said. "We need the check." That's when the credit card was declined. Michael watched Carano's face change from confident to concerned as he tried a second card, then a third. All declined. The man had been flashing wealth moments before was suddenly scrambling, checking his phone, making urgent calls. "There seems to be a problem with your accounts, Mr. Carano," Michael said quietly, enjoying the moment more than he should have. Carano looked up sharply, studying Michael's face for the first time. For just a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty, as if something about the waiter seemed familiar. "Cash," Carano muttered, pulling out a roll of bills. "I'll pay cash." But Michael had already seen enough. As Carano and his associates left, Michael discreetly photographed the documents they'd left behind. License plates, business addresses, phone numbers, all the information a former detective might need to understand exactly what Vincent Carano was planning. Michael knew he was playing with fire, but he couldn't stop himself. Over the next 2 weeks he used his access to Le Grand Chateau's wealthy clientele to gather intelligence on Pinnacle Development Corp. It was easier than it should have been. Rich people loved to gossip, especially about other rich people's business ventures. Michael learned that Pinnacle was targeting retirees in Miami with luxury condo developments that existed only on paper, the same elderly demographic that Meridian had victimized. But this time was different. This time, Michael wasn't constrained by warrants and protocol. He could follow leads that would never hold up in court but might prevent new victims from being scammed. He started small. Anonymous tips to the Miami Police Department about suspicious real estate activities, carefully worded warnings to potential investors he identified from Carano's documents, questions posed to other restaurant clients who mentioned Florida investments. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a regular customer celebrating her 80th birthday at the restaurant, mentioned that she was considering investing her late husband's pension in a guaranteed return Florida development. "Pinnacle Development," she said happily. The young man who called was so nice, so professional. 20% returns, fully insured. Michael's blood ran cold. Mrs. Whitman was exactly the type of victim Carano targeted: elderly, wealthy, trusting, and alone. "Mrs. Whitman," Michael said carefully, "have you signed any contracts yet?" "Next week. I'm meeting with their representative at my lawyer's office." Michael made a decision that would change everything. He was going to stop Vincent Carano, even if it meant risking the life he'd rebuilt. Michael's plan was simple but dangerous. He would attend Mrs. Whitman's meeting as her financial advisor, using the opportunity to gather evidence of Carano's fraud in action. If he could record Carano making false promises or forging documents, that evidence might be enough to bring him down. The risk was enormous. If Carano recognized him, Michael's life could be in danger. If the plan failed, Michael would be exposed as a disgraced ex-cop playing detective. If he was caught recording without consent, he could face criminal charges himself. But Mrs. Whitman reminded him of his own grandmother, who'd worked her entire life for the pension that would support her in retirement. The thought of Carano stealing that security from another trusting elderly person was more than Michael could bear. He spent days preparing, researching Florida real estate laws, studying Pinnacle's marketing materials for inconsistencies, learning everything he could about the legal requirements for legitimate investment opportunities. Most importantly, He acquired a small recording device and learned the laws about when recordings would be admissible in court. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in Mrs. Whitman's lawyer's office on the Upper East Side. Michael arrived at the law office wearing his best suit, carrying a briefcase full of financial documents he'd prepared to support his cover story. Mrs. Whitman introduced him as Michael Thompson, my investment advisor, and the elderly lawyer barely looked up from his paperwork. Then Vincent Carano walked in. For a terrifying moment, Michael thought Carano would recognize him immediately. But 3 years had changed Michael's appearance. He was thinner, his hair was shorter, and he wore glasses he'd never needed as a detective. More importantly, Carano's arrogance worked in Michael's favor. The idea that a disgraced ex-cop was now working as a waiter and had somehow infiltrated this meeting was so far-fetched that Carano's mind couldn't process it. "Vincent Carano, Pinnacle Development," he announced with his practiced charm. "Mrs. Whitman, you're making an excellent decision." For the next hour, Michael watched Carano deploy every technique he'd used at Meridian. Fake property surveys, forged inspection reports, fabricated insurance policies, promises of guaranteed returns that were mathematically impossible. All of it recorded on the device in Michael's briefcase. But the smoking gun came when Mrs. Whitman's lawyer asked to see the official property deeds. "Of course," Carano said smoothly, producing documents that Michael immediately recognized as forgeries. The letterhead was wrong, the signatures didn't match public records, and the legal descriptions were for properties that didn't exist. "These documents," Michael said carefully, "appear to have some inconsistencies." Carano's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" "The legal description here mentions Section 15, but according to Miami-Dade County records, that section is a protected wetland. It can't be developed." The room went silent. Mrs. Whitman looked confused. Her lawyer suddenly seemed very interested, and Vincent Carano was staring at Michael with growing suspicion. "Who exactly are you?" Carano asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Michael Thompson, certified financial planner," Michael replied calmly. "And someone who believes Mrs. Whitman deserves better than fraudulent documents." That's when recognition finally dawned in Carano's eyes. The waiter from the restaurant, the questions about Florida investments, the declined credit cards that had somehow triggered account freezes. "You," Carano whispered. "You're that disgraced cop, Torres." Michael smiled. "Former Detective Torres, and you're under citizen's arrest for attempted fraud." What happened next happened fast. Carano lunged for his briefcase, trying to destroy the forged documents. Michael tackled him, years of police training taking over as they crashed into the lawyer's filing cabinet. Mrs. Whitman screamed. Her lawyer called 911, and Michael held Carano down while extracting a full confession that the recording device captured perfectly. "You think you've won?" Carano snarled. "You're nothing. A washed-up cop working as a waiter. No one will believe you." "Maybe not," Michael replied. "But they'll believe the FBI Financial Crimes Unit when they get my evidence." The FBI had indeed been interested in Michael's information, very interested. Over the past weeks, Michael had been feeding them intelligence through anonymous tips, and they'd been building their own case against Pinnacle Development. When Detective Sarah Chen arrived on scene, Michael's former partner, who'd never believed the corruption charges, she was grinning. "Michael Torres," she said, as Carano was handcuffed. "I should have known you'd find a way to take down the bastard who framed you." The evidence Michael had gathered led to the biggest financial fraud bust in NYPD history. Carano's network included 12 co-conspirators across 5 states, with total attempted theft exceeding $200 million. The forged documents, recorded confessions, and financial records Michael provided were instrumental in securing convictions for everyone involved. But perhaps more importantly, they exonerated Michael completely. The investigation revealed that Carano had indeed planted the money in Michael's apartment, using a corrupt building superintendent, who eventually confessed in exchange for immunity. 6 months later, Michael Torres stood in Police Commissioner Rodriguez's office, listening to an offer he'd never expected to hear.
"Detective Torres," the commissioner said, "we'd like you to consider returning to the force. Full rank restoration, back pay for the time you lost, and command of a new financial crimes task force."
Michael looked out the window at the city he'd served for 12 years, thinking about the choice before him. He could return to the job he'd loved, vindicated and respected once again. Or he could continue his new life, free from the pressure and politics that had nearly destroyed him.
"Commissioner,"
Michael said finally,
"I'm honored by the offer, but I think I'll stay right where I am."
The commissioner looked puzzled.
"At the restaurant?"
"At the restaurant," Michael confirmed.
"You'd be amazed what people reveal when they think no one important is listening."
Michael Torres returned to Le Grand Chateau that evening for his regular shift. But now he worked with a new purpose. The NYPD had officially contracted him as a confidential informant, using his unique position to gather intelligence on white-collar criminals who thought they were beyond the reach of law enforcement. The wealthy diners still barely acknowledged his existence. They still spoke freely around him, discussing business deals and family secrets with careless confidence. They had no idea that their invisible waiter was one of the most effective law enforcement assets in the city.
2 years later, Michael Torres had helped solve 14 major financial crimes, recovered over $500 million in stolen assets, and prevented countless elderly victims from losing their life savings. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman had become something of a celebrity in New York's social circles, telling everyone about her brilliant financial advisor who'd saved her from a terrible scam. She still dined at Le Grand Chateau regularly, always requesting Michael as her waiter. Vincent Carano was serving 15 years in federal prison, his criminal network dismantled, his victims compensated through recovered assets. Michael had been offered dozens of book deals, movie rights, and consulting opportunities. He'd turned them all down. His strength was in being invisible, in being underestimated, in being dismissed as just a waiter. The most dangerous criminals were often the most arrogant ones, and arrogant people never suspected that their dinner service might come with a side of justice. Michael Torres had learned that sometimes the best view of the criminal world came from the serving side of a dinner table, and sometimes the most effective law enforcement happened when suspects never realized they were being investigated. The badge was gone, but the detective remained, just hidden in plain sight, carrying plates instead of a gun, serving justice one meal at a time. As he polished wine glasses before the evening shift, Michael reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd lost everything, his career, his reputation, his marriage, only to discover that his real calling wasn't wearing a badge. It was being invisible in a world where powerful people forgot that invisible didn't mean powerless. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person everyone should fear. And sometimes justice is served at room temperature, with a professional smile and a side of perfectly executed takedown. Michael Torres straightened his tie, picked up his order pad, and prepared for another evening of being the most dangerous waiter in New York City. The dinner rush was about to begin, and somewhere in that crowd of wealthy diners, Another criminal was about to make the mistake of underestimating the man bringing their appetizers.